This is Karen with newclevelandradio.net, and it is time for Care Notes with Doug Wilber from Cherished Companions. And Doug, I like the topic for today because we're talking about people who, as we age, we all lose a little bit of our cognitive and even our physical being. And sometimes we don't even realize it ourselves that this is happening. Other people do. And I don't know about you, but I've noticed that there are a lot of people who are just not so respectful of others when they are stumbling around. And I saw it not too long ago, actually, with my husband, who actually, we thought he was going through a cognitive issue. It happened to be a medication, but he kept tripping at work. And one of the gentlemen there, who's much older than him, just looked at him and said, maybe you're too old to do this job. And my husband actually came home in tears because
Wow.
it was like, this just started happening. What's going on? So what is it that you see out in the field when you're, helping people and providing services?
Yeah, and maybe one of the things I'll do is I'm going to roll back the clock a little bit. And there was some really bad things that have crept into our culture. And I have enough exposure to other cultures that I can see it glaringly at times. Many other cultures have this veneration for those that are aging, um, and this deep respect for the wisdom, for what people that have aged bring with them, and that has largely been lost in our culture. You look at the statements that were made back in the 60s, don't trust anyone over 30, until people started hitting 30, and that started migrating north. And there were those kind of concepts that youth is good and aging is bad, and whether we realize or not, those things crept into the culture in a really significant way. And because of that, it has created really a disrespect for those that are older. In the past, a musician that was aging was not out of style. They were considered to be gaining more and more mastery, whereas with pop music, it was, you have these bands that pop up, and their people are in their 20s, and typically, they're kind of a flash in the pan, it's done. And they oftentimes, the band, the individuals either burn out or just kind of leave the stage. And so
Right.
it's this churning out of young talent, but also young views of the world and other things. And so we've lost this sense of elderhood, and the sense of age brings wisdom. If you look at the scriptures, it talks, like the Psalms, talks about gray hair, but it talks about it not in a bad way, but in a really good way. That's tied in with wisdom and
Right.
and you think about it, and uh, people didn't live that long. So if you did have someone that lived long, um, it was always seen as a truly a remarkable thing. And what did this person do? What can we learn from this
Sure.
person? Probably played into that whole reason that there was respect. And I think about some of the statements that all of us have seen, kind of memes or statements like, oh, yeah, the idea of um, youth is wasted on the young,
Yeah.
and and I know that the older I get, I kind of think, boy, I wish I knew that when I was younger. I wish I had that wisdom that I have now, um, when I had more strength and more ability. And to some degree, I think we have to change the concept where, in the past, I think the way that would manifest itself, and this is just me kind of with
Sure.
my thoughts, but the way it would manifest it, if you respect those who are older, if you respect your elders, when they shared something with you, the strength to carry it out would then take place by those
Right.
who are younger. So, in many ways, it wasn't wasted because and the person who was older could share that wisdom, and then it could be carried out. And so then we end up having collective wisdom that is, shared by a whole culture. And we are at our own peril if we don't rely on some of that collective wisdom,
Exactly.
you
You know,
know.
last week, I don't know if you were aware of it, but the Master Games were actually being played in Cleveland, Ohio. And these
Yeah.
all senior adults. And they were, running races and lifting weights and doing things that I know when I was younger, my grandparents who came from Europe, I don't think they lifted anything other than maybe a grocery bag. Okay. Um, and just watching some of them, it just was like, well, yeah, we all have those abilities. Okay. We need to really showcase it more because younger people today are the ones who are sitting around playing the video games or whatever. Um, and yet now you have 70 and 80-year-olds out there, you know, participating in sports. That is something to be looked up to and to be admired.
Right. And I agree with that. But I will say that a part of what I'm saying is, even beside that, I mean, I think that to some degree, a little bit of that is those who are older still trying to hold on to youth.
Could
Um,
be.
Now, that's not the totality of it. And we need to take care of ourselves, and movement makes a big difference, and longevity and doing well and your cognitive abilities and stuff. So I'm not dismissing that
Sure.
even a little. Um, but what I am indicating is something a little bit different from that. And that is that the wisdom that is there, even besides the weaknesses, because let's face it, an 80-year-old, even though I saw not too long ago when Hulk Hogan was speaking, he had huge, packs as far as I mean, he was still very good for someone in
Sure.
their 70s, but that's the exception. I mean, in
Right.
general, that's the exception. But what does tend to carry is the wisdom, is the knowledge that has accumulated over a lifetime. And again, youth is at peril when they don't rely on that, when they don't look at that. Um, the it, it, it's it's interesting. One of my favorite writers is a guy named G.K. Chesterton, and he said, um, and I hope I'm quoting this correctly, but he said, tradition is is democracy for the dead, and it is a way for those who have gone before us, to have a voice in the future. And you know, to me that's not quite at the, you know, if we're not going quite to dead. But I do think that, you know, what is carried, which in large part is tradition, it is the way that things were done, is important. You know, I think the youth of today have lost something that we had and probably our parents had in spades. And that is the ability to face difficult times and not shrink back. The ability um, to, you know, confront other ideas or other things and be able to handle that and not necessarily react, to say my way is the only
Right.
way. I think the idea of working very, very hard, is another part of you know, what our parents, taught, at least taught me. I mean, my parents worked extremely hard, and you know, I hope that I carry a bit of that legacy, on, and I do think the youth of today are oftentimes given so many things that is being lost.
Right.
And where that's important, honestly, is, um, that is truly one of the keys to success for people. If you know, I had an uncle that I had the privilege of working with, for a period of time, um, and he said, "It's funny how lucky I get when I work hard." And I have used that quote so many times, but it's true. And
Absolutely.
and and so it's much of this wisdom that's passed on. It's, you know, it's a sense of history, a sense of belonging, a sense of the past being united with the future. One of the things that they have found is, of all, um, the animals in the animal kingdom, I think humans are unique. They're one of the only, if not the only, um, uh, mammal that, where the grandparents, um, uh, live, to see
Yeah.
their
Right.
grandchildren, and play an important role. And when you pull that out, the, you know, the role of the grandparent in a child's life, you've removed something very significant from a developmental standpoint. Um, so there's a lot of implications to that, not least of which there's a reason why, human grandparents live as long as they do.
Right.
And really what it has to do with is, how long, people live after childbearing ages. Most animals die very quickly to the end. When they finish their childbearing age, they die very quickly. Humans are unique and lasting much longer than that. And again, when something like that happens across, like, the animal kingdom or whatever, there is typically a reason for it.
Right.
And the reason in our case is this collective wisdom. So again, you know, the implications of that are really significant. If you don't respect, if you don't honor, if you don't have a place for those that are older. So
Mhm.
I don't know if I even answered your question
Yeah.
before.
But you know what I think is interesting? It sounds like you and I were both brought up very similarly, that we had our parents who were teaching us and our grandparents and aunts and uncles, and we learned a little bit from everybody.
Hmm.
But I think what happened, and I'm going to at least speak for myself, that when I became a parent, there were these old tapes playing in my head. My parents were always trying to tell me what to do. Now I look back at it, they were really teaching me. But at that point, it was like, well, they always told me what to do. I don't want to be that same kind of parent. I want to give
Mhm.
my child a little bit more freedom. And I did. And every time we would try to share something with my boys, and even my parents and Richard's mother, they would like listen, but you didn't think they were retaining it. But the interesting part is I'm now realizing how important those stories were that they were told and the things they're now doing. But they notice that their friends don't have that same kind of respect. I mean, when
Mhm.
my youngest son will call me when he's driving to work and ask me, do I really think after wearing his suit twice, it should go to the dry cleaner or not? It's like, well, we talked about this when you were younger, what gets dry cleaned, what gets washed. But now it's like, I think you know more than I do about this. So can you just give me some background? And it's just a different feeling. But I think
Yeah,
parents have to get, I hate to say it, parents have to get more involved. Okay. They have to be part of that teaching as their kids are growing up.
yeah. Well, and one of the things we do teach, let me ask you a question. And I don't know what your experience was, but when you were growing up, did you grow up in a family where your grandparents, or at least one, lived with you?
My grandfather did live with us for a short period of time.
Yeah,
Um, he actually asked to move to the well, at that time it was considered the old folks home. Um, but that's where he wanted to go because he knew people there. And
okay, yeah.
uh, but that was interesting. But when he did live with us, the interesting part was um, he treated me like a fragile little doll. But my one brother, he would make him sit down and he would tell him stories about, the Cossacks coming through Russia and
Mhm.
destroying the villages. And thank God for my brother repeating the stories to me because I never would have known any of that. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah. The experience of living with a grandparent was so common, and especially those that had come from the old world,
right. Yep.
that uh, that the grandparents would live with um, their daughter or their son, and then the children, and so that collective wisdom was oftentimes passed on, and that has gone on for generations and generations, which is one of the reasons why I think we're built for homes, not for institutions.
Right.
That this is a generational thing. This is something that has been the human condition. One of the things that they look at when they're doing archaeology, I don't know if you know this, is what happens. They could tell like the level of civilization and advancement by one factor. Do you have any idea what that one factor might be? I mean,
No.
there's
Yeah.
several, but one of the big factors is um, if they could tell from the remains that are there that they took care of their injured, that
Interesting.
they were caring for those that instead of just kind of leaving them to perish or die, that society developed around um, those that provided care for someone that had broken a foot, let's say,
Right.
even though that slowed down the whole group. The fact is they were watched out for and they were cared for. And when they find that, they understand sort of where civilization was at, and the advancement, of the species, I guess. And so from very early on, that which defines us as humans is how we care for each other, And who are the ones that are most vulnerable? It's going to be those that are older,
right.
those that have the gray hair, and who are more likely to break something or to have issues. I guess those are older in the warriors, potentially, or children. Um, but but I do think that that's the way we are built. I think it's built into our nature and who we are. And again, when something is built in like that, it is at our peril when we disregard it. Um, Now, I go one step further, which is, out of my belief system is that we were created that way, and that there is something innate in how we're built, that we should be doing that, and that's what makes things work the way that they do, and work well. A similar thing might be, why do people respond better to whole foods than they do to processed
Yeah,
foods?
exactly.
Because we're built that way. That's what we're going to respond to, and
And
there's
you know what? And you've brought this all into your home care services, because one of the things that I have learned is that your caregivers are not only caregivers, but they are storytellers, and they're listeners, and they're supportive. And so for maybe the older person who doesn't have anybody immediate in their life to share with, they're sharing their stories with these people who are now becoming almost like an extended family. And
yeah,
a couple of the groups that I have joined recently, I am finding there are so many people out in the world who are so very lonely, and whether they have children or not. And my comment always is, you've got to share your story. You've got to, there's a way to find people to become your extended family, no matter what your age, because we need that. And for me to learn from you over the years, I mean, that to me is a joy, because there's just things that you don't think about on a normal daily basis. And then you meet somebody who says, well, this is what I learned. This is what I do. It makes life just even richer.
yeah, yeah. I think one of the things that, if one of the ways that they do punishment in a prison is by putting people in isolation. One of the ways I think that you can cause a society to go crazy, and oftentimes those people do go crazy, is if we place our ideas in isolation. That because we'll become unmoored. And I do believe that we need to be moored now more than ever, because you know every few years we develop some sort of collective insanity.
Yep.
And part of it is because we're not looking um, at, at either history or those who are uh, you know to our north. I mean, those who
Right.
are a little bit older, and it's really important because so often, a lot of things I remember see my grandparents or even parents reacting to something, and you kind of thought, well, that's because they just don't get it, or whatever, or it's but it really was because they did get it, and they had seen where that path was likely to take,
Right.
oftentimes. And so they were reacting to that. And did they always handle things well? No, because sometimes it's reactive rather
Right.
than to try to help or explain or
Exactly.
uh, or show. But I can say this is there are many times that either I or my friends or others, if they had listened to the wisdom of the grandparents or their parents, would have been much better off, in life. And some of this is uh, um, in very broad kind of concept, which
Sure.
is we need to respect those who are older, even if they're having trouble remembering names, or if they're having issues with how fast they are in responding to things, or if they have a limp or seem to be struggling physically in some way or another. um, doesn't mean they don't have the wisdom still, they do. It just means that when you're a youth worshiping culture, you can very easily miss um, the 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 vessel that's bringing this to you,
Right.
because
Exactly.
you see the cracks and you don't understand that that vessel is containing a lot of wisdom in it, and that you need to drink from it, before it is gone,
Absolutely.
and so from a cultural standpoint, that's the big picture thing. From a practical standpoint, how do we do that? Well, we care for those that are older than us.
Older than us.
We listen to those. We fellowship. We bring them into our circles, and you bring youth and aging together. There's some really interesting concepts that they've done at times where they have put college students with people who are older, kind of in roommate type of
Right. Exactly.
scenarios, and found that everybody did better. So,
I can
and
totally, it's funny. My mother-in-law used to have a group of friends that she grew up with, but then she had a group of younger people. In fact, they were even younger than my husband and myself that she did things with. And every once in a while, I'd say to my husband, like, why do they, want to hang out with mom? I mean, I loved hanging out with her, but she was my mother-in-law. And he said, just watch how they interact with her.
mhm,
And to this day, if I run into any of them, they will remind me of things that she shared with them, things they did together. And so, they kept her younger, so to speak. And they said that they learned maturity from her. And I thought, what an interesting concept. And I've always had it around me. So I guess I've really been lucky. And I love going to nursing homes sometimes just to have conversations with people and to find
yeah.
out what did you do when you were younger? So,
Oh, you cannot believe the number of times, I'll talk to the folks that we are caring for, and they have lived storied lives, like amazing lives, things that they've invented, you know, things that they've created, the times that they had in wartime, or in times where people have been in Europe. We've had the privilege of taking care of Holocaust survivors, and all of those things. If you just looked at that person, you would say, "Oh, that's a little old lady or a little old man," and kind of dismiss even
right.
because of how they're talking, or a thousand things. And then you talk to them and you realize, oh my gosh, I'm in the presence of greatness.
Absolutely.
And then they don't even have to do great things to be in the presence of greatness. They were and what I mean by great things, they don't have to have invented
Sure.
something, but I really never found someone that we've cared for that wasn't fascinating in one way or another, was not an amazing individual. And but you have to have ears to hear and eyes to see for that to actually recognize it. I do think from kind of a macro standpoint, we do have to change this scenario, and it starts with um, looking at how things have been done in the past. Say, how can we at least, I know we're in different times, but how can we reproduce some of this? And
Right.
then we really do need to mix ages. I will tell you this, that one of the secrets I've seen for those who are older is that people, when you get into your 70s, 80s, and 90s, your circle becomes smaller and smaller because you start losing your friends, and so oftentimes, I was just talking to someone yesterday, and they said, I don't have any friends. I'm just basically by myself. And um, and one of the things that you were talking about with your mother-in-law, I bet you she stayed younger longer because
Yeah,
she had people who were significantly younger than she was.
exactly.
And I found that that is a secret for longevity, is that someone who is older that has a strong ties with younger people, and younger, maybe 10 or 20 years younger, but it's still younger. And that brings a life. And part of it is because as they get older, they're not being isolated. And again, isolation will kill. But also there's a benefit the other direction,
I love it.
which we talked about. So anyway, rambling thoughts
Well,
that have a purpose.
they're great thoughts, and maybe we can get some people to get encouraged to get out there and start making some new friends, young, old, and in between. I love it.
Yeah. Call your older friends, call your grandparents, learn from this maybe a little bit. So thanks.
Thanks. Talk to you next month. Bye bye
Bye
now.
bye.